storytelling. We'll talk about what stories are about, how they impact us, how we can think about narrativizing our own lives, how we can come up with little autobiographies of things that are non-living, right? So all of these things we'll look at. And I'm Shruti. I am a graduate from IIT Madras in the Humanities Department. Okay, so what can we look forward to? We do a lot of things in this particular session, right? So we'll maybe have a little bit of a discussion about why we need stories at all, right? Maybe I can get your responses on that. And we'll have a little bit of a chat, after which we will create a story tool basket, create a plot tool basket. It will be a breakout room activity where hopefully, 3 or 4 of you get together in one room and sit together, create a plot, which we will then put together in the form of a story. And in the later sessions, we'll do things like other activities, things like the autobiography, anything of anything. And then we'll use some other story prompts that you can use as homework. So far, so good. Can I see maybe a couple of thumbs up? Is the premise understood? Okay, great. Thank you so much. So let me begin with the question that I had already talked to you about. Why stories? Why do we have stories? Why do we listen to stories as children? Why do we watch movies? Movies are stories, right? Why do we read books? Why do grandparents tell you stories when you're about to sleep?
I think it is a way to convey some message to in a easier way to some children or something.
Great. Conveying message in an easier way. Absolutely, Aditya, you're correct. So that's conveying. Others?
To share.
To learn the language properly, to hold the grasp of a language and increase vocabulary and all.
Great. So using storytelling, narrativizing techniques, you will have a better command of the language.
Yes.
Telling a good story means that you have the highest level of command on the particular language, because you're not just using sentences grammatically, you're using them creatively. You're merging sentences together in a sense that in a way that together they make a lot more sense. They're compelling, they're impressive, right? So in that sense, being able to tell good stories means that you have a very good command over the language in which you're telling the stories. Okay, what are the reasons? Why stories form such an important part of our lives?
Mom, maybe it can improve our imagination skills too.
Yeah, absolutely. Imagination skills. Story is about connecting events. Connecting events that may not be connected, and then being able to create an arc out of it, which requires a lot of imagination. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. So good. What other reasons? Why are we so attracted to stories? Why does the human sensibility?
Usually stories are fascinating, like
entertainment purpose.
Stories can...
One person at a time. Can you perhaps raise your hand and I will give everyone an opportunity to speak? Sneha, Aditya, Kalyani, and then Ronak, in that order.
Okay, ma'am.
Sneha.
Yes. I think stories help young children to learn better. Some moral stories can inculcate through stories. It makes it easier and interesting for them to learn things better.
Great. Young children, morals. Absolutely. Stories are the most common way for cultures to pass on values to their newer generations.
Yes, and
Right?
it's very difficult for young children to gain attention and give some learnings to them. So stories help in that also. So I think
Yes, yes, absolutely. Passing on values from one generation to another, and not in a very didactic way, not in a rule-based way. Oh, this is the rule, so you have to follow it. And narrativizing whatever value you want to pass on makes it more compelling, makes your young children sit down and listen to the entire thing from beginning to end. Right? So that's what makes stories compelling. Aditya, would you like to say something?
Actually, human mind like fascinating thing, like something which is fascinating. So stories is a way to inform about the world to a children or to something to other person. So giving some emotional connection between two person or something like that. That's how I think.
I'm trying to hold on to the one point you talked about, how human mind is fascinated by stories for a very particular reason, right? And let me push that a little bit further, right? So just take a look at um, the slide that I've created here. What is happening?
It is.
It's
It
kind
is.
of a clue.
Yes. Yes. It's about the weather in a year, like different
It's
weather
about seasons.
seasons. Yes,
It's about
seasons.
seasons.
It's about seasons. So Kalyani, would you like to talk about how seasons and stories and the human mind, all of these, how do they relate?
Yeah, surely. Here in the picture, see, there is if season is changing, then
Hmm?
according to that, climate is also change. As per climate, the tree, the level of tree, like leafy tree or the leafless tree kind of tree, that is also changing. So the environment is also changing according to the season. So as per the stories, story gives us a better picture to visualize the things like that. So if
Others?
we
So
uh,
if we
if there are many things connected to each other, then story can be very well. In a story we can connect in a very well manner, so that things we can understand and remember easily using the stories.
okay, there is connection, is what you're saying. Stories are, in a sense, connecting different events together, and there is some sort of a cycle, some sort of an arc that helps you remember better. Okay, okay.
Yes.
Om Sharma, would you like to say something?
Yes, ma'am. Through a story, in this picture, we convey the person, our thinking in a step by manner. Suppose
Mhm.
we put water in a tree, then leaf will be green. When it's absorb the sunlight, it will be more. Simply saying, it's step by step we can convey everything to a person, and uh, that thing it store in our subconscious mind. When anything that type scenario we see or happen, that time we can easily connect it through that story. Okay, that thing is told by someone like this.
Right. So the point that I want to make here, you're absolutely correct. It makes it easier. Stories make it easier for one to digest certain things, right? And just like the seasons in a year, just like the seasonal arc, you have winter, then you have spring, then you have summer, then you have monsoon. Just like a seasonal arc, most stories also have an arc, right? You begin with um, some sort of a conflict. There is an issue, and then it grows, and then things happen, and then winter comes, and then at the end everything is resolved, and then we are back to spring, right? Just like the seasons of a year, stories also follow a certain arc, and that is why it is very natural for the human mind to really get attracted to stories, to really remember stories, because there is an arc, there is a cycle of sorts, right? Which is why generally stories are a very, very good narrative medium for if you want to convince somebody to do something, you start with a story, right? If you want to write an SOP, for instance, a statement of purpose to get into a university, you tell them the story of your life. You don't just say, I did this, I did that, I got this prize, I got that prize. No, you have to narrativize it. You have to create a story out of what you've done. So there is the connection aspect, which is very, very important, which the human brain loves, which the human mind loves, which is why stories are just an amazing narrative medium for you to communicate whatever you want to communicate. Okay. So having talked a little bit about why we need story, any other thoughts? Others who want to maybe suggest ideas, if you have any thoughts?
Actually, one thing I have, Karan.
Yes, please.
Actually, I think when someone narrate a story to someone like any person, so human mind tends to like picture that thing like stories. So I don't understand how it goes. Like if someone tells me a story, so I want to create the picture of that thing like in my mind. So
Yeah, you create the picture, and that's the useful part of narrativizing something. Giving a list of bullet points versus giving a story is when you create a movie in your own head. But giving a list of bullet points, the same level of visualization does not happen. Am I right?
yes, yes.
So that is why stories are more compelling.
Ma'am, I want to add one more thing, is that when you tell stories, then the connections formed in the brain help us remember things for longer time.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. I don't know the science behind it. I don't know the neuroscience behind it. Because perhaps you can look that up as science students. But I would definitely agree with the fact that if somebody teaches me a concept in the form of a story, I remember it better instead of reading it or learning it by rote from the textbook. Right? Do you agree with that?
Yes, ma'am.
Right?
Yes, ma'am. During exam time, suppose we face to learn to difficult facing difficulty to learn any question answer, that time we say to our colleague, okay, you tell me this thing. After that we can easily memorize it, and when suppose this question came in exam, we can easily way we form it and write it and draw it a picture easy way.
Right?
Yeah.
So especially if they connect it to other things that are happening
Yes.
around. Imagine
Yeah.
that, this, if you have an important maths concept, then you somewhat create some story around that concept, which will help you remember better. Absolutely. Pyari, do you
Yes.
want to say something?
Yeah, stories are basically about sharing life experiences, and that way it becomes easy to relate.
Great. Yeah. It's sharing life experiences, sharing anecdotes, which means you connect with other humans better. And a huge part of human life is to be able to be connected, be socially connected to other people. And how do we do that? By exchanging stories. So absolutely. Others? Prince?
Yes, ma'am. I just want to define a story in a single line. It's give an opportunity to learn from another person experience, whether we know that person or no. Their story evokes feelings within us.
Right? If you don't know anything about any person, you will, if they can tell you 100-word story about themselves, you'll know a lot about them. If they're able to do it well, if they're able to narrativize it well. Absolutely. Others, any opinions? This is just a discussion. There is no correct, wrong answer. I just wanted to get you all to speak.
One question I have.
Ma'am, stories can a good representation of describe a situation.
Yes.
So,
So, I mean, not all descriptions need to be stories. you can describe a particular place or a particular person without necessarily making a story out of it. Correct?
Yes.
But
Yes, ma'am.
good stories definitely involve good description. A description doesn't need to be a story, but a story needs to have good description. Yes, Aditya.
Well, actually, I was saying that is there any relation of reasoning and logic to stories or not? Or not?
Absolutely. Right? If there is no logic to a story or to a movie plot, then there's going to be plot holes and you're going to find them out. And that's not going to be good for the storytelling or the storytelling experience for the person who's narrating the story and for the person who's listening.
And one
That's
more
the
thing
difference
that
between a good movie and a bad movie.
and we also don't know the source of a story, like who first narrated it. It come a long way, like a decade or something, like century from century. So we don't know the source where it comes from, like
Do we need to know the source? Why are we obsessed with the origins of something?
Okay. Yes, I got it.
Right? There is no need to know the source. No, we are not doing scientific research based on this story. We are not using that to cure somebody's cancer. No, so
Yes.
they just need to be true.
And
As long as we're able to acknowledge.
Ma'am, one question I have. Through a story, we can manipulate anyone. Like
Yeah.
we create a rumor around it and put them into it, and after that we will wandering around what is happening at what it is. Is it
100% correct. Stories can be used as weapons as well. Right? You narrativize something, you persuade somebody to do something.
Yes, ma'am.
Right? This is
Actually,
what
yeah.
most
ma'am
sales
also
people do, right?
I think it is very relevant in today's world. Like everyone is going to narrate his own story, like in politics and other things also.
Absolutely. Stories can be your innocent fairy tales or your innocent bedtime stories for children. They can be a good thing that, gets your children to sleep. They can also be this huge manipulative tool that you can use for, manipulating, masses of people into doing something. Right? That is how gossip and rumors spread. Gossip is also a form of story. Rumors are also a form of story. Right? Very fascinating to look into how gossip spreads, how stories get magnified, blown out of proportion, and are still very, very compelling, very, very attractive. Right? Somebody wanted to say.
stories, yeah, ma'am, stories sometimes acts as a convincing one, like you told SOP. So we usually wrote the SOP to convince our professors that whether we are applicable for this project or not. So it helps us to motivate someone else so that they can hire us.
Yeah, that is what I mentioned. It is a very useful, persuasive tool. It can be persuasive. There is a very thin line between persuasion, motivating somebody, and manipulating somebody. So that's the little line that we're talking about, right? So stories are very, very powerful. They can be innocent little lullabies to put young children to sleep. They can be value transmitting tools. They can be persuasive tools. They can also be manipulative tools. Right? So there's a whole spectrum of functions that stories have. Okay, so having talked a little bit about why stories are around us, why we're so attracted to stories, why they have such an impact on us, we'll move on to reflecting a little bit about what a story has. What do you think are the elements of a story?
Intention.
Round.
Character. Okay.
Characters, places.
Message.
So not every story needs to have a message. Right? Not every story is a moral story.
Objective, ma'am.
This is not a scientific research project where you need to have an objective or a goal.
Some location kind of people involved, what story tells exactly, how you
Somebody
are
said
doing.
characters, absolutely.
And
But
first
you
of
said location.
all, story needs a character.
Absolutely. I agree with that. I've already typed that down. Character is one of the
Genre?
elements.
Genre?
Is it Samyukta? Right. Yeah. So genre is what a story fits into. But within the story, what elements do you need? Genre is the superset. This
Genre.
story
Ma'am,
belongs to the
Tells plot.
mystery genre.
they need a plot also. So something.
Genre means
Please raise your hands. Because so many people are speaking at the same time. And I will give everybody an opportunity to speak. Yes. Swati?
Mom, theme.
Theme. All right. Okay. Let me push you a little bit further. Aditya, do you want to say something?
Actually, we need a plot for creating something like.
You need a plot. Good. So what does a plot involve? Let me bring you down to that.
Okay. Okay.
Others. Om Sharma.
ma'am, purpose.
Think about
Sometime-
the elements. Think about you had to sit down and write a story yourself. You would need to come up with something, right? So what are the things you would come up with?
Basically, why I tell purpose, reasonment. Sometimes we write a story to
Why
for
or the purpose? I'm sorry to interrupt, but the
Yeah.
why or the purpose is in your head. Correct. But what are the very practical elements you need to have in the story? You need to have characters, correct?
Yeah, definitely.
That I've agreed. One of you said characters. So we need to have
Yeah.
characters. You need to first think of a protagonist. Then if you want to have, supporting characters, if you want to have an antagonist, or if you don't want to have an antagonist, if you want to just have two protagonists, or if you just want to have a flawed protagonist, whatever be it, you need to come up with characters, right? That is one part. What about the other parts? Sneha, do you have something to say?
Challenges for the protagonist. Challenges. Some challenge will be there.
Right. Absolutely. We're getting somewhere. There is a fundamental challenge. What makes a story in a very traditional sense? What does the traditional story involve? So, can you think of the earliest story that you ever read? What was the first story in your LKG textbook, English textbook? Kalyani.
Sometimes Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. Like this
Ma'am,
rhymes.
in my opinion, basically actions we are going to show in a story. So one element could be the action, then a scenario.
Very, very soon.
Hello?
Yeah, who is speaking? Could you just...
Kalyani.
Kalyani, right.
Yeah, ma'am, I was saying action is the element of story. Like what action perform in a story, that kind of story. Someone perform this, after that someone another person can perform this, like that. So action can be the element of a story.
What leads to that action? I want to somebody else said. I want to circle back to what somebody else said before, which is challenge. In traditional stories, say Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. What is the problem? What is the turning point that creates the need for a story? What happens to Humpty Dumpty?
Falls down.
He falls down. That is the challenge. Right? And all the king's horses and all the king's men, they did help him. That's the story. So what is the challenge that Humpty Dumpty faces? It's that he falls. They shouldn't have fallen. Right? So that story begins with Humpty's fall. Similarly, say the story of how many of you know the story of the crow and the jug of water that had very little water?
Yes, yes, I know.
Right? It's one of the earliest stories we are told. So what is the problem there? What is the challenge there?
Actually, he was like, there is a crow, I don't remember, but he used to put some stone in the jug to, wait 1 second.
What is the problem? What is the challenge that the crow faces? Somebody else?
He struggles to drink water.
Struggles to drink water.
Yes, yes.
Yes,
Right?
ma'am.
Why? Because the water is too less in the jug and his beak is too short. What does he do? He creates a solution for it by putting stones in it. So there's a challenge and there's a resolution. Right? Most traditional stories are like that. There is some sort of a conflict and there is a resolution of that conflict. Right? So the first aspect, of course, is characters. So once you have to write a story, every story is a character. Just give me 1 minute. I need to just quickly the door. Hey everyone, I wasn't speaking. I just required 1 minute. I'm back. Can you hear me well now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. Right. So the first thing is you guys have already said every story usually has a character, right? Now the character, is it the very typical Bollywood hero all the time? No, right? It can be a woman, it can be a man, it can be a thing, can be an animal. You know, can you give me an example of stories that have animals as their primary characters?
There are lots of movies in lots of movies.
And the
Who's
Lion King.
speaking?
The
Yes,
Yes.
me. It is Kajuri.
Scooby-Doo.
Mm,
Mowgli.
Mowgli, yes. Scooby-Doo, yes. What else? Think of stories that you've listened to in your childhood. There is a very famous book.
Anaconda.
Anaconda.
Greedy Fox.
And Tom and
The Ugly
Tom
Duckling.
and Jerry. Okay, great.
Rabbit and the tortoise.
Toy Story.
There's somebody who said Rabbit and the Tortoise.
yes, the monkey and the turtle. There was a
Monkey and the Turtle. Right, absolutely. Monkey and the Crocodile. That
yes,
story
yes.
where the monkey is supposed to give away its heart to the crocodile and then, yeah.
Yes, and there is also the king of jungles.
Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Absolutely. But, you know, in Goldilocks and the Three Bears, Goldilocks is the main character. Right, so I wouldn't count that in. Now, think of all these stories, you know, rabbit and the lion, monkey and the rabbit and turtle, then monkey and crocodile, all of these stories, and you know, even other stories in these Tinkle comics where there's Kalia the crow, right? All of these stories. Now, have you ever heard of the Panchatantra?
Yes, I have read all of them.
Right? So what is a Panchatantra about? It is literally all stories that have animals as its primary characters, right? So when we think of stories, generally, because we are used to seeing movies all the time, and our imagination for story is generally a movie, right? It has a story. And what happens with Indian movies and movies in general is that
Actually,
you have a strong male character in the beginning.
Yes, movies are very different from our stories. Our old stories is very grassroots stories. Things around us, not like in a high profile and not as monotonous thing, like single thing. So that.
Yeah. So there is no one big protagonist all the time. That is what I want to say. The character does not need to be one main human protagonist. It doesn't have to be even animals or plants. It can be a ghost. Maybe you can write a story that has a ghost as its primary character, right? Or you can write a story that is about a sewing machine, and the sewing machine may probably have the ability to speak, right? But regardless of what the characters are, who the characters are, they generally are characters. Every story has a character, and that is what we call the who of the story, right? So, for instance, Lata is a woman who's a 20-year-old woman. She has a few attributes. I'm making up this person. Lata does not exist in real life, perhaps. But let's say, imagine there is a 20-year-old woman called Lata who is irritable. She gets angry quite fast. If you annoy her, she'll get angry, right? But she's also very kind. If you're in trouble, she'll help you out. If you need help with your homework, she'll help you out. If you need to be dropped off somewhere, she'll take her bike and drop you, right? So that's Lata. She's also very, very ambitious, right? She wants to start a business of her own at some point, or maybe she wants to move up in her career, right? So she's very, very ambitious that way. And I've just created the image of a character. I'm sure some of you have imagined a person while I was talking about the character, right? In a similar way, let's think of a different character. I've given a different character here. Richard is probably a 60-year-old man. I'm imagining a white man because the name Richard is not very, very common in India. And he is wise, for instance. He's a wise man. He's a wise old man. He's in mourning. In mourning, as in he's mourning somebody. Maybe he has lost a beloved. Maybe he has lost a very close family member, a wife, or a son or a daughter, right? And he's in mourning, and he has superpowers. Right? I've just randomly given off some adjectives, some attributes to this person, right? Maybe he has the superpower. Maybe he has the power of memory. Maybe he can never forget. He can remember everything that he ever sees or hears or feels. Right? Maybe that's the superpower. Right? I've just created this character out of nowhere. And as a storyteller, as somebody who writes or narrates stories, the first thing you would need to do is come up with characters for your story. The second thing is something you guys have not talked about yet. Right? You said characters, and then we talked about conflict. What other things do you need to have?
Plan of plot and
Conclusion.
setting.
Conclusion, yeah, you'll automatically have.
A series.
Plan of plots and settings of the story.
Setting. Pyari says setting. Yes, absolutely. What do you mean by setting?
Just like in settings, you can say that just like the story, when the story is going to start, and what the characters are do, and when the actions are by the characters has been done, something like this.
Yes. Setting is usually answers the question when and where. Right? Because Lata is a 20-year-old. That is giving you some level of information. But in which year is Lata 20-year-old? Is she a 20-year-old in 1920s? Or is she a 20-year-old in the future?
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Right?
When
We
the
don't
story
know.
take place.
Right. When did the story take place? And where is Lata from? Is Lata living in Kanyakumari or is she from Jammu? We don't know, right? So that is, we need a setting generally of a story, which is a country or a culture or a place or a climate or a time, basically the where and the when, right? The time and the place is together what we call the setting. So for instance, I've given two examples of settings. One would be south of India on a university campus in a city, 1965, right? I've given you a year. I've given you the setting. It's a South Indian city and the story is happening on a university campus. And it's 1965, right? So based on that, you would come up with the story in a very different manner because you have an imagination of what university life felt like in the 1960s in South India, right? Or for instance, rural Germany. Maybe our setting is rural Germany, somewhere in a little village in Germany. There is a religious cult which is going against mainstream religion. And the year is not even 2022. It is 7 years, it is 8 years ahead. It is in the year 2030. So we're being a little bit ahead of where we are contemporarily, right? So that is what a setting is. And finally, of course, is the conflict, which you've already mentioned. Usually for a story to work, the main character is involved in some sort of a conflict, right? There is some issue that leads to the story actually happening, correct? So in the case of the crow story, there is not enough water and its beak is not long enough to reach the water. In the turtle and the in the crocodile and the monkey story, the crocodile is asking the monkey for its heart and the monkey has to escape to save its life somehow, correct? So all of these are the conflicts that the main characters are usually involved in, right? The why, right? We talked about the who of the story, which is the character, the where and the when of the story, which is the setting, and finally the why of the story. Why is the story happening? Because there is a central conflict, there is a central plot aspect upon which this entire story hinges, right? Around which this entire story revolves, right? So for instance, maybe the main character Lata, she is irritable, kind and ambitious, and she's a young college going woman in a university in South India in 1965, but perhaps she has murdered somebody, right? And that is the conflict, and she wants to escape from the police, right? Right? Or perhaps Richard, who is part of a religious cult in rural Germany, who is mourning the death of his daughter, has overheard a secret that is changing his life, right? So the conflict here, the thing that starts off the story, the turning point in the story, that is what we call the conflict. Conflict is basically why the story is actually happening, right? So far so good. Every story usually has a character, a setting, and a conflict, right? Of course, it has.
Ma'am, can I say something?
Mm-hmm.
There's also can be possible a plan, like how the story is going on, what is going to be in fast, at fast, and then in the middle, and something is going to be in the last. The flow of the story, the plan of the plot.
Yeah, the plan is the connections that you make, that you do as a writer, as a storyteller. I'm asking you about the elements, about the discrete elements, correct? You make the connections in the story, but before you do the actual cooking, to use a cooking metaphor, you bring together the ingredients, right? You bring together the separate ingredients, and some of the most crucial ingredients to the cooking up of a story are characters, settings, and conflict, right? Okay, great. So that's, oh, we don't have enough time, is it? I can't believe we're still.
Yeah, no, ma'am. We have class next.
Okay, so what we'll do, we'll do this activity in the next session. But let me just give you a brief idea of what the activity is about, and we can do this in the next session. I'll just give you a brief idea. Okay? So you will all be put into breakout rooms of 3 people each in the next session when you come. In 10 minutes, you'll be given 10 minutes. One of you think of a protagonist, write down 2 or 3 traits. You know, like the way I told you about Lata. Lata is a 20-year-old, and I gave 3 adjectives to describe what Lata is like in my head. Lata is kind, Lata is irritable, Lata is ambitious. So one of you in the room will write down a protagonist name. The second person will write down a setting. So Lata is part of a university campus in Bangalore, for instance. Right? The third person will write down the conflict. And the conflict is that Lata has cheated on an exam and she's trying to hide from the dean. She's trying to somehow cover it up. Right? So that would be the conflict. So 3 of you will think of 3 different elements of the story. The elements that we have so far discussed, which is character, setting, and conflict. Once that is done, I will give you access to a document and you will add all of these things to the document. Add your plot basket elements to the document. Odd numbered groups pick the plot elements given by your nearest even numbered group. So basically, you will have breakout rooms, right? So room 1 and room 2 will interchange their plot basket, and you have to create a story out of that plot basket. Is it clear? So basically, 3 of you will come together and create a plot basket of settings, character, and conflict. Another 3 of you will come together and create a different character, setting, and conflict. You will exchange this and then create stories based on that. Is that clear?
Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So this is what we'll be doing in the next session. We don't have enough time, but next session we'll do this as an activity entirely. So for this session, do you want to talk about Snehadas? Yes, thank you so much. Very interesting. So what we will do for this session is you have to tell me about the earliest story that had an impact on you, that you still remember, that you heard. We can have a little chat for the next 10 minutes. What is the earliest story that you heard from maybe your parents, your grandparents, your teachers, or maybe a movie that was so compelling that you still remember it? And this has to be something from your childhood. Kalyani, do you want to say something?
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes.
Who's speaking?
Ma'am, myself Swati.
Yes, Swati. Go ahead.
Ma'am, actually, most of you know that this grandmother and the crow, that story with the vada.
Grandmother and the crow and the vada.
Yes.
Oh, what story is this? Can somebody tell me? What is the story? Can you maybe summarize it for me, Swati?
Yes, ma'am. It's just about crow will be there, and this grandmother will be cooking vada. So this crow will be coming and try to take one vada, but the grandmother won't allow it, and somehow it cheats and it took away one vada. That's the story.
It's a funny little story, right? Yeah, I remember this as well. So the earliest story that I heard was the story of a little boy called Raghu, who had 2 ghost parents, who had 2 ghosts, who were his parents basically in a previous life, and he would go to the tree on which these ghosts lived, and he would take 2 chapatis and he would ask, should I eat this chapati or should I eat just this chapati? And the ghost parents would get scared, thinking that he was going to eat them, and then tell him that he could have any wish, whatever he wanted to have. So then Raghu would ask, I want a magic carpet, or I want a magic laddu, or I want a magic cooker, right? And then he would use that to get back to his grandmother, who is alone at his house, and help his grandmother cook. And he would use the carpet to go to the market to get vegetables, right? So that was the story that I heard. So can you take up what was the character in the story? Is there a character? Character is Raghu, obviously, and then there are 2 other characters, the ghosts, right? And then the conflict here is that the ghosts think that Raghu is trying to eat them when he's actually not, and that is the turning point in the story, right? Anyone else wants to share anecdotes of the earlier stories they've heard?
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I remember a story about this fox and the crow. The crow will have the same thing. Crow will have its what I will be eating, and fox would want it. And it says it tells the crow that, oh, you sing so beautifully. Why not you sing a song? So flattery, how it really becomes. Yeah, that particular story. I also every time somebody you haven't heard the story.
I have, of course. I think we all have.
So every time somebody praises me or somebody does that, I get this thing in my mind. I'll think, okay, oh, is it for some other purpose? Do they have any hidden agenda? Something like that. But that was a very strongly influenced my life. That particular story.
Right? Yeah. So some stories just have such an impact on you, and that is why we keep talking about how strong stories can actually be, how strong, how powerful a tool they can actually be. Yes, Ankit.
Yes, ma'am. There was a story about turtle and swans. They used to live in a pond, and once the drought came, so the swans flew and went to another pond, but the turtle couldn't. So they tried to help him. So they took a long stick, and both the swans hold them at their ends, and told the turtle to also hold it with their mouth. And they said, if anybody will make fun of you, don't say anything. Okay, while we are taking you by flying. So when they were going, the children in the ground, they were making fun of the turtle and every setup that they are going like that. So turtle wanted to say back, and in that process he fell and died. So the moral of the story was that we should not reply to every criticism. It makes us fall into some kind of trap and eventually harms us.
Absolutely. Again, another Panchatantra tale, right? All of these stories are all Panchatantra stories that we've all listened to as children, right? Panchatantra and the Jataka tales, all of these are animal-based moral stories. Yeah, great, wonderful. Jigar, Koyal? Do you want to say something?
There was a story of woodcutter and mermaid. His axe was falling to the river.
Could you speak up a little, please, Mr. Jigar? I am very sorry, I can't hear you.
Ma'am, there was a story of woodcutter and mermaid.
Am
I audible? Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes.
There was a story of woodcutter and mermaid. The axe of woodcutter just got sinks in a river, and the mermaid just that he will give his axe. First, he tried to give gold axe, then he said, "This is not my axe." Then the silver one then at last, I'm not, I'm, I'm not remember all the story, but
No, I
I know the
remember
moral of the
this.
story. Yeah, yeah,
Honesty is the best
yeah, yeah,
policy,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I know that. So he
forgot.
takes the axe that is his.
Yeah, yeah. I forgot the story, but
Yeah.
I very clearly remember the moral of the story.
Right? So what did we discuss in the beginning of the session? Stories are a very powerful way in which we use to pass on values from one generation to another. And clearly that is what is happening here. That is what we remember, so many years later as adults. We might not remember many things from, LKG or UKG when we did these things, but we still remember these stories, right? So that's why they're very important. Okay, so if anyone else has anything to say, we can talk about it a little bit more. Otherwise, we can call it a day. And in the next session, we'll do this activity and we'll just get writing, right? We'll start the storytelling. Okay. Anyone else has anything else to say? Yes, Pyari. Yes, Pyari, do you have something to say?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute, ma'am. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you can.
It's not a story. I mean, I just wanted to know what is that we are trying to achieve through this series, workshops, because the reason, no, I really have a problem with the, speaking. So when I saw that, it's a spoken, speaking related workshop I came in. So I just thought, I did not read any emails, or I did not get to hear about what this workshop was really intended for. I thought, I'll just try to understand why we are conducting the session.
Let me just briefly tell you what it's about. We do this storytelling workshop once a semester, like once each semester when the new batch comes in, and it is intended to get students to collaborate with others, create stories, and then narrate it in class. So that is the idea. That's what we'll be doing in the next two sessions and the session after that. The final session, we'll be doing a little bit about impromptu speaking, like how can you speak on the spot, right? How can you speak about certain things? If you're given a topic, if you have to speak at a party or if you have to speak at a meeting, how can you do it on the spot? So that's what we're going to be talking about, right? Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody. And any other questions? If not, we can call it a day. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of the day and see you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Profile and not as